It's 10 past 10 and it's time to look to the skies with ornithologist Scott McPhee. And today we're talking about the king of the bush. Very common sound around Australia. Ornithologist Scott McPhee is speaking to Belinda about the Kookaburra.
Today we're talking about kookaburras. Scott, how are you this morning? It's been a little while.
It has, Belinda. You've been away, have you?
I have. I've been on holidays and I've been listening to kookaburras.
Oh, terrific.
You hear them everywhere, of course, but they must be, there's no mistaking that sound.
They don't really need any introduction, do they? Everyone's quite familiar with kookaburras.
But there's obviously different species, I gather.
Yeah, so a lot of people won't be familiar. In the listening area, there's two species. There's the laughing kookaburra, which we all know, but also the blue-winged kookaburra, and that's more of a northern Australian bird. So it comes down the east coast a little bit, and probably just in the Lockyer Valley and the Sunshine Coast hinterland is where we get them in the listening area. So they're not very common throughout most of the listening area.
So what's the difference between the two?
Yeah, well, look, that's a good question because most people will know that your regular laughing kookaburra does have blue on its wings. And so if all you're looking at is just the blue, it's easy to think, oh, I've got a blue-winged kookaburra. But the easiest way to tell them apart is when you look at a kookaburra, just look where the eye is and there'll be a horizontal brown band kind of going through the eye and then behind the eye in a normal laughing kookaburra, whereas the blue-winged kookaburras don't have that. And they're just slightly larger and they've got much heavier bills. So that's another thing that gives them away. But just look for the brown line. That's the main thing, yeah.
I'll have to look for the brown line. There you go. I've never really looked that thoroughly at them. Let's have a listen to the call.
Okay. So you can see it's kind of similar to the laughing kookaburra, but it just doesn't quite kind of build to the crescendo that a laughing kookaburra does. And this is not a call that the blue-winged kookaburra, that doesn't seem to turn up in any of the Hollywood movies. You probably noticed the old Tarzan films and things like that. Whenever there's a jungle scene, they chuck a kookaburra in for good effect. But
they do.
It's a bit of a cliche, isn't it?
It certainly is. But a kookaburra, of course, is not laughing. What is it actually doing?
Yeah, I mean, it does sound like a laugh, but they're marking the territory. So it's a territorial call. And in the first recording, you would have heard there's a couple of other birds trying to join in and just kind of supporting in the background. So the way the kookaburras work, and I'll just be talking about laughing kookaburras from now on because, we don't see many of the blue wings in our area. So they live in groups of about 8 or so, and there's a dominant breeding pair in there. And so that call that you hear is one of the two dominant birds with a couple of the supporters just kind of joining in and supporting them. So it's just basically proclaiming its territory. But having a large group like that is actually a really good breeding strategy because then when it comes to raising young, all of them share in and help. So out of let's say there's a group of 8, the other 6, some of them will be some of last year's babies, and they all help with the incubation and the feeding of the young, so it kind of makes it easier on the parents. And I actually think this is quite cute. All of them, all 8, will develop a bare patch just on the bottom of their tummy, which when they incubate the eggs, it allows a transfer of heat to happen more effectively onto the eggs. So all of the other ones, including the young ones, really get into the raising of the chicks. But that's kind of where the cuteness, I guess, with kookaburras end, because have you ever heard the phrase siblicide?
I have not, but it doesn't sound good.
No, it doesn't. And it's not. So typically kookaburras, when they nest, and they nest in hollows or they'll even excavate termite mounds or in trees. But so that they're cavity nesters, and usually they have 3 eggs. But what happens is the first 2 that hatch out, they turn on the third one and kill it. So, and they've got a bit of a hook at the end of the beak, which they use that for, or they can turf out the third chick. So So it's quite normal for 3 kookaburra eggs to be laid and only 2 of them survive, just because the other chicks kill the third one. And if they don't kill it, then the third one usually just starves to death because it gets out-competed for food. But
They just
the
don't want to raise more than two. Too much hard work.
no,
What is going
but
on there?
it's the siblings that are doing it, not the parents. So
Right.
I don't know what it is. It's just an evolutionary strategy. The chicks that kill the other chick, they do better. Like they grow faster and turn out to be larger birds. And if they let the third one survive and then kind of, it starves to death. So it's in their interest to actually kill the other one, which is pretty horrible. But that's just the way it goes. So it's a bit brutal, but you get bigger and stronger kookaburras through that method.
What is the range of the laughing kookaburra?
Yeah, well, we get them across the eastern side of the country, down south. They've actually been introduced into Tasmania and Western Australia, where they don't belong. And you might remember we were talking about invasive birds a while ago, and it's a similar situation. So over in Western Australia, they have a lot of birds just unique to that southwestern corner, a lot of which are cavity nesters, like the 2 species of white-tailed black cockatoos. So now you've got kookaburras in there also competing for hollows. So it's not a good idea, but they're not competing with them for food, which is a good thing. And when we think about kookaburras and what they eat, we always think about the stereotypical thing of them with a snake or a lizard. And have you ever seen one with a snake?
I haven't. No, I've never
Yeah,
seen one of those.
yeah. One day I was in my yard and I just heard this kind of thumping going on near my aviary. And I've got 2 golden shoulder parrots in an aviary, and every now and again butcher birds come down and kind of scare them. And I thought, oh, that might be what's going on. And I looked over, and there was a kookaburra with a snake just
Oh,
bashing it
really?
against the aviary. And so, we're used to seeing them with larger animals, even fish. I've seen them grab in East Creek Park here in town in Toowoomba. I've seen them take little catfish out of there. But they actually get most of their food is actually insects and
That's what I've
arthropods.
seen. I've seen them with, like a grasshopper or something.
Yeah, exactly, and little katydids and things like that. But this reminds me of I think it's probably the most amazing experience I've ever had with wildlife. Years ago, I used to live when I was a teenager in Toowoomba on the range at Prince Henry's Drive, and we back then in the 80s we were surrounded by bush, and I used to feed the birds, and feeding I think is a bit problematic, and maybe this is something we should talk about one day. But anyway, back then in my youth, I used to put out meat and feed the
Yes,
kookaburras.
you'd put like little. I've seen people do that. They put like little bits of mince meat or something.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. And so I would be feeding the resident kookaburras and magpies and butcher birds, and the crows and currawongs would turn up, but usually get chased away by the kookaburras and magpies. But so anyway, so one day I was gardening in the front with my mum, and we were collecting boulders from the just bush next door to put her on the edge of our garden. And one of these kookaburras that I used to feed turned up, and it landed. It landed. We had a telegraph wire going into the house. It landed on this wire right above me and looked at me. Kind of turned and looked at his head, and I got eye contact with him. And then he flew off into this bush block next to us. And I thought, oh, this is interesting. I wonder what he's doing, because he wanted to make sure that I was looking at him. And he went to a big pile of logs and things. You know how people kind of push them together before they burn them off. And he was fossicking around in there. And then he flew back and he landed on the wire above me again. And he caught, I don't know what it was. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. It was kind of like a cross between a spider and a centipede. I'm not very good with insects or arthropods, but it was this weird looking animal, and he dropped it down to me. So he knew I was looking at him. He went and caught this and he gave it to me. And I thought, I know what you want. So I went in the house, I got out some of the meat that I would have put on a feeding table later that afternoon, and I threw it up to him, and he caught it and flew off. So it was like,
I'll give you an insect if you give me some of that meat.
yeah. He was upselling. He did quite well, I think. But it was just amazing, because the intelligence that was going on there, to think that, if I do this, then I will get that. And I guess that's part of the appeal why people feed birds, is you develop some kind of connection, but it's a bit of a double-edged sword. And yeah, one day we should really talk about this. But I think you're better off just creating an environment where birds can go looking for their own food. And of course, kookaburras, we're so used to seeing them sitting about 10 metres off the ground and just eyeing off the food sources on the ground for like 10 minutes or so before they go and grab something. So, but I don't know, it was just a really amazing experience, and that happened with a kookaburra, and I've never had anything like that with any other animal ever since.
There you
So I
go.
think, yeah, there's a lot of
They're super
intelligence in them as
smart
well.
birds. Yeah, they are super smart. Thank you so much,
Yeah.
Scott. Time again has beaten us, but when do we have you
Yep.
back on?
So on the 29th of June, and I think now that winter's on us, we should just talk about what birds are coming in and out of the area, and there's a bit of movement seasonally that happens. So we'll just look at that and just some general things about bird migration in general, because it's fascinating the way birds can actually migrate, particularly the birds that can go for a week or more on the wing and how they actually navigate their way around the planet. So I think that'll be an interesting thing to talk about.
And people can follow what you're doing.
Yeah, so just go to my webpage, birdbites.com.au, and there's a lot going up on Facebook. I put some great footage of yellowtail black cockatoos on my Bird Bites Facebook page and the YouTube channel. And I'm working on a doco. I've got so much footage on birds, I've decided, well, I'm just going to put it all together in a doco. So that's my main activity outside of any of the social media stuff I'm doing. But easiest way, and just birdbites.com.au.
Well, thank you very much, Scott. I look forward to talking to you again on the 29th.
Yeah, no worries, Belinda. Okay, we'll catch up then.
Scott McPhee there, ornithologist, speaking with Belinda Sanders about the kookaburra. And as a person who has a bird phobia, I know it sounds really weird and I can't get over it, but there's plenty of me out there apparently that are scared of birds. I'm happy if they stay 10 metres up in the air and don't come that close to me. Just putting it out there, people, but more from Scott later in the month. 10 ABC Southern Queensland.